Millionaire CEO hired a fake bride to crush his ex, but ended up crushed by love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The cafe clock hit 11. The tables were nearly empty, but she was still on her feet, moving from one end of the room to the other. Her hands carried trays stacked with mugs. Her face held the same tired smile she had worn since morning. The soles of her sneakers were thin, barely cushioning her from the cold floor. Every step hurt, but stopping was not an option. Rent was overdue. Her brother's inhaler was running out, and earlier that day, her mother had begged for even $50 to cover groceries. For the customers, she was invisible. For her family, she was the only hope. That weight pressed harder than every tray she carried. Then it happened. A stumble, a slip, a latte spilled, splashing across the polished lines of a businessman's suit. The liquid spread down the fabric like a stain of shame. He stood, voice sharp and cutting. "Do you even know how much this costs?" The calf froze. Dozens of eyes turned on her. Her cheeks burned. She mumbled apologies, grabbed napkins, tried to wipe it clean. But the damage was already done. Her manager stormed over, whispering like a blade against her skin. "One more mistake, and you are finished." Her stomach dropped. Fired? That meant no rent, no medicine, no chance. She bit the inside of her lip until she tasted blood, forcing herself not to cry. Hours later, after closing, she walked out into the night. Neon signs buzzed above, flickering like they were mocking her. The city skyline stretched high and glittering, a world built on glass and money that had nothing to do with her. She pulled out her wallet. 3 crumpled bills. $12 total. Not enough for a week's food. Not even enough for hope. She leaned against the cold brick wall, staring up at those towers that felt like another universe. And then, fate moved. A black limousine slid to the curb. Its glossy frame reflected the streetlights like a mirror of wealth. The tinted window lowered. Inside sat a man in a tailored suit, his presence sharp, controlled, magnetic. His eyes studied her, steady and calculating. When he spoke, his voice was calm but commanding. "I need someone to play a role, someone with nothing to lose, and I pay very generously." Her breath hitched. The words very generously echoed in her chest, louder than her heartbeat. He leaned forward. "I need a wife. Not for love, not forever. A contract marriage, appearances only." The street was silent. The neon hummed. Her mind spun. Was he serious? Or was this the kind of madness that rewrote destinies? He slipped a card into her shaking hand. Gold letters carved his name into its surface. A CEO. A man whose face she had only ever seen on magazine covers at grocery store checkouts. Before she could answer, the limousine door closed. The car rolled back into the city night, leaving her standing alone under the streetlight. The card was heavy in her hand. He wanted a fake bride, a contract wife. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw it away. But desperation pressed harder. For her family, for survival, for a chance at something beyond this endless grind. Could she say no? Her heart pounded. One decision stood before her, and it promised to change everything. The business card felt like it weighed more than her entire life. She held it all night, staring at the gold letters until they blurred. Sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sharp gaze of that man in the limousine, the way his words carved into her. A wife. Not for love. Not forever. Just a role. By morning, she was still torn between pride and desperation. But when her mother called again, voice heavy with worry, telling her the landlord was threatening eviction, the choice no longer felt like a choice. She dressed in her cleanest shirt, brushed the frayed edges of her skirt, and made her way to the address on the card. The building towered above her, glass walls glinting against the Sunday. The lobby alone looked like another world, marble floors gleaming, a chandelier hanging like frozen fire. She clutched her bag tighter, conscious of every scuff on her shoes, as she walked to the reception desk. The assistant was already waiting. "He will see you now." The elevator ride stretched forever. When the doors opened, she stepped into an office that felt more like a throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, leather chairs lined the walls, and behind a massive desk sat the man from the limousine. He did not stand to greet her. His presence filled the room without effort. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." She obeyed, her palms damp. His voice was measured, professional, as if this were nothing more than another business deal. "I will be clear. I require a temporary wife. 6 months. You will attend social events with me, accompany me to family dinners, and present yourself as my loyal spouse. In return, you will receive compensation far beyond what you could earn in 10 years of work at that café." Her heart pounded. "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. His gaze lingered on her face, unreadable. "Because you are unknown. You are not from my world. And because you look at me without expectation, that makes you useful." The words stung, but she kept her chin high. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, pages of neatly typed clauses laid out the terms. No intimacy, no interference in his personal business, absolute discretion. A financial reward so large her hands trembled just looking at the number. Enough to save her family a dozen times over. Her throat tightened. "This is a marriage." "It is a contract," he corrected coldly. "Marriage is only the performance." Silence stretched between them. Outside the glass windows, the city buzzed with life. But here, it felt like another universe. Finally, she whispered, "And when the 6 months end?" He leaned back in his chair. "We part ways. You return to your life. I return to mine, nothing more." The words were final, sharp, but something in his tone flickered an edge of something unspoken. Her fingers tightened on the pen. Every instinct told her this was madness. But the memory of her mother's tired voice, her brother's labored breathing, and the cold emptiness of her wallet screamed louder. She signed. He watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the folder and said, "From this moment on, you belong to me, at least in the eyes of the world." Her chest rose and fell with a mix of fear and disbelief. She had stepped into a world of glass towers and ruthless contracts, a world that was never meant for someone like her. And yet, for 6 months, she would play the role of a millionaire's bride. What she did not know was that this act, meant to be nothing more than a performance, would become the most real thing she had ever lived. The ink on the contract had barely dried when her life shifted into a new rhythm. Within days, she was escorted into his world, a world of glass penthouses and imported cars, a world where silence was sharper than words and rules were carved into stone. She arrived at his residence with a single worn suitcase, the zipper struggling to hold together. The driver carried it into the penthouse, but she kept her eyes low, afraid to meet the gaze of the doorman who already whispered behind polished smiles. The elevator opened to a floor that belonged entirely to him. The doors slid back, and the space before her stretched wide and gleaming. The penthouse felt more like a museum than a home. Every surface gleamed, every line was perfect, every piece of furniture looked like it had been chosen for display rather than comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, pouring in the fading orange of the setting Sunday. Yet there was no warmth. He was waiting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You will stay here now. The bedroom down the hall is yours. Do not enter my study without permission. My schedule is non-negotiable. If anyone asks, we are a devoted couple. Do you understand?" She nodded, clutching her bag tighter. "Yes." R10. His gaze swept over her, pausing on the frayed hem of her coat, the scuffed leather of her shoes. For a moment, his jaw tightened, as if he were realizing just how wide the gulf was between their worlds. Then he set the glass down and turned away. The days that followed were a clash of habits. She brewed her coffee in a chipped mug she had smuggled from home, while he drank from crystal. She hummed to herself while cooking simple meals, while he preferred reservations at restaurants, where one plate cost more than her weekly paycheck. She moved through the penthouse like an intruder, careful not to disturb anything, while he walked with the authority of a man who owned everything he touched. Yet despite the silence, there were collisions. One morning, she woke early, wandering into the kitchen in worn pajamas, hair tied messily. She found him already there, scrolling through emails on a sleek laptop, immaculate even at dawn. She froze, embarrassed, and muttered, "Sorry." He looked up, eyes flicking briefly to the faded fabric of her clothes, then back to his screen. "This is your home now. You do not need to apologize for existing." His voice was flat, but the words lingered in her chest long after she left the room. Another evening, she returned from the grocery store with bags of affordable staples, bread, milk, and canned soup. He glanced at the items, brows raised. "You did not need to shop. The housekeeper can stock anything you require." "I like doing it myself," she answered softly. Something in her tone made him pause, as if her stubborn simplicity unsettled him more than any negotiation boardroom ever had. Despite the rules, despite the cold walls, the space between them began to shift. Not with warmth, not yet, but with tension, unspoken, undeniable. Every shared glance at the dinner table, every brush of hands when passing in the hallway, every accidental collision of two worlds refusing to bend. At night, she lay awake in her new room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint footsteps of a man who lived just beyond the wall. She told herself it was just a contract. 6 months. Nothing more. But the quiet ache in her chest betrayed her. And on the other side of that wall, he sat alone in his study, staring at the closed door of her bedroom, a glass untouched at his side. He told himself she was just a role, just a convenience. Yet for the first time in years, he felt the presence of another human being press against the solitude he had built like armor. Neither of them would admit it yet. But the act was already slipping. The performance was already becoming something dangerously close to real. The contract quickly moved from paper to performance. Within weeks, their arrangement demanded public appearances, carefully staged moments, designed to convince the world they were a perfect couple. The first test came on a Friday evening, when he escorted her into a ballroom glittering with chandeliers and polished marble. The event was hosted by his family's closest allies, a gathering of power, wealth, and whispers behind champagne glasses. She felt every stare land on her as they stepped inside. Her dress had been chosen by his assistant, tailored to fit her figure, elegant but understated. It was the first time she had worn anything so fine, and the fabric felt almost unreal against her skin. She held his arm lightly, as instructed, her posture careful, her smile practiced. Inside, however, her heart raced with the fear of stumbling, of exposing the lie. He leaned closer, his voice low and firm. "Do not look down. Look at me. You are mine tonight. Walk like it." She lifted her chin, trying to steady herself. For a moment, their eyes met, and she caught a flicker of something in his expression. Not coldness, not calculation. Something else she could not name. The cameras flashed as they moved across the floor. Guests whispered. Some smiled politely, others frowned with thinly veiled suspicion. His ex-lover was there too, draped in silk, her laughter sharp as glass. She circled like a predator, her gaze fixed on the woman at his side. When introductions began, the questions came wrapped in honey but dripping with venom. "How did you two meet? What a surprise engagement. How very sudden. And you, dear, what exactly did you do before this whirlwind romance?" The words made her stomach twist, but she remembered his warning. Stay calm, play the role. So she smiled, answering simply, choosing honesty without detail. "I worked at a café by Verdun." A ripple of shock spread among the guests. His ex laughed lightly, her voice cutting through the air. How quaint! The silence that followed was suffocating. She felt her face flush, her throat tighten, but then, his hand tightened over hers, steady and deliberate. "She worked at a café," he said, his voice carrying across the room, firm enough to silence the whispers. "And that is where I found someone genuine. Someone who does not measure life by titles or bank accounts. That is why I chose her." The crowd quieted, some glancing away, others exchanging uneasy looks. His ex's smile faltered, her perfect mask cracking for just a second. The rest of the evening unfolded with tension woven into every step. She played her part. But more than once, she caught the weight of his gaze on her. Not judgment, not annoyance, something deeper, something searching. Later, when the ballroom emptied and they returned to the limousine, she let out a shaky breath. Why did you say that? You did not have to defend me. He turned his head, his expression unreadable in the glow of the city lights. It was not for you, it was for us. A weak link ruins the illusion. Remember that. But she heard what he did not say. His words in the ballroom had not sounded like strategy. They had sounded like truth. As the limousine carried them back to the penthouse, she sat in silence, staring out the window, her heart tangled in confusion. The contract said she was only a role. But roles did not come with warmth. Roles did not come with glances that lingered too long. And he, sitting beside her, poured another drink he never touched, his eyes fixed on the city skyline. He told himself it was all an act. Yet her presence beside him had shaken something he had buried for years. The performance was flawless that night, but the lines between the contract and reality were beginning to blur. Days melted into weeks, and what had begun as rehearsed performance started to take on a texture that felt alarmingly real. The contract still hung between them like an invisible wall, yet cracks began to form in places neither of them expected. She was the first to notice the small things. He always returned home late, his face drawn with exhaustion, his shoulders heavy from endless battles in boardrooms. One night, when he collapsed on the sofa without even loosening his tie, she hesitated before stepping closer. Quietly, she set down a bowl of homemade soup on the table. "You should eat something," she said softly. He opened his eyes, startled. For a moment, the cold CEO mask slipped. He looked at the steam rising from the bowl, then at her, confusion flickering in his gaze. "You made this?" She nodded. "It is simple, but it is warm." "One?" He picked up the spoon slowly, as though unused to such gestures. He tasted it, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression softened. He did not say thank you, but he finished every drop. Another morning, he fell ill with a fever. His staff suggested calling a private doctor, but she insisted on staying by his side. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, whispered reassurances, and sat awake through the night to check his temperature. He drifted in and out of sleep, and in his haze, he murmured her name, not as a business partner, not as a contract bride, but as if she truly belonged. Her heart ached with the weight of it. She reminded herself again and again. 6 months, nothing more. Yet the lines on the page could not silence the way her chest tightened when she saw him vulnerable, human, no longer the untouchable figure in a tailored suit. He, too, began to notice her presence in ways he could not dismiss. She never asked for more money, never tried to pry into his business. She hummed softly when she cooked, a tune that lingered, even after she left the room. She watered the plants in the penthouse that his staff had long ignored. She smiled at the doormen and the drivers, calling them by name. It unsettled him. For years, he had believed kindness was weakness, that sincerity had no place in his world of contracts and power. Yet this woman, the one he had hired for appearances, lived with a quiet integrity that disarmed him more than any rival ever could. One evening, after a long day, he found her sitting by the window, sketching in a small, worn notebook. He stepped closer, curious. "What are you drawing?" She flushed, closing it quickly. "Nothing important." He reached out, and to his surprise, she let him take it. Inside were sketches of the city skyline, of the penthouse, of faces, his face among them. Not the cold expression he wore in public, but softer, more human. Something stirred in his chest. He handed the book back carefully, his voice low. "You see me differently than the rest of the world does." She met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "Because you are different when the world is not watching." The silence that followed was charged, a tension that no contract clause could define. That night, he lay awake, unable to silence the thought that perhaps he had made a mistake, not in hiring her, but in believing he could keep his heart untouched. And she. The fragile balance they had built began to shatter the night the rumors spread. It started with a whisper in glossy magazines, then headlines on financial blogs, and soon every social media feed was ablaze. The story was simple but cruel. The café girl who had tricked a millionaire CEO into marriage for money. Pictures of her leaving the grocery store with modest bags were splashed across tabloids, twisted into proof of her gold digging. A photo of her wiping sweat from her forehead during a long shift resurfaced, captioned with biting words, "From serving lattes to serving herself a fortune." When she walked through the penthouse lobby, the staff no longer smiled. Their eyes were full of quiet judgment, as though they now believed the headlines. She felt the weight of every glance, every whisper, pressing against her chest until it was hard to breathe. That evening, he returned home with his jaw clenched tight, his phone buzzing nonstop with calls from board members and family. He tossed the device on the table and faced her with eyes colder than she had ever seen. "Is this what you wanted?" he demanded. "Attention? Money? To play the victim while the world sees me as a fool?" The words struck like knives. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "You think I planned this? That I wanted strangers to tear me apart? I never asked for your money. I never wanted any of this." He turned away, pacing the room. "Perception is everything in my world. My reputation, my company, my family legacy, it is all at stake. And right now, you are the weakest link." Her eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "I signed your contract. I followed your rules. I stayed silent when people mocked me. I only ever wanted to help my family. And now you think I am nothing more than a parasite?" Silence fell heavy between them. For the first time since their arrangement began, the distance between their worlds felt insurmountable. The next morning, she packed a small bag. She left the elegant dresses hanging in the closet, left the jewelry he had provided in their boxes. She took only her worn sneakers, her thrift store jeans, and the sketchbook she had filled with fragments of a life that had begun to feel real. When he found her at the door, she did not look at him. Her voice was steady but hollow. "You wanted an illusion. And now that illusion has cost me everything. I will not stay here to be your weakness." He said nothing. His pride held him still, his arms crossed as though he could cage the storm building inside him. The elevator doors closed behind her, and for the first time, the penthouse echoed with emptiness. He poured himself a drink he did not touch. Outside, the city lights blazed, but the room felt darker than ever. He had told himself it was just a contract. He had convinced himself he was untouchable. Yet the silence she left behind was louder than any scandal. For her, the return to her old apartment was suffocating. The rent notice still sat on the counter, her brother's inhaler still half empty, her mother still weary from endless shifts. She tried to slip back into the rhythm of her old life, but her heart refused. Every corner reminded her of what she had lost, not in wealth, not in luxury, but in something she never thought she would find in a contract marriage. Both of them lay awake in different worlds that night. Both of them wrestled with the same unspoken truth. The contract had been broken, but something far more dangerous had already been written into their hearts. Days passed in cold silence between them, but outside, the storm only grew louder. The tabloids fed on the scandal, and his ex-lover fueled it with carefully placed lies. Anonymous sources claimed the calf girl had plotted the entire marriage, that she had demanded millions to keep his secrets. Investors grew restless, his family questioned his judgment, and the pressure mounted until even his board demanded answers. One night, exhausted from endless meetings, he found himself reviewing documents in his study when a name caught his attention. The source of the rumors had been traced. Every story, every photograph, every carefully timed leak led back to one person: his ex-lover. The realization hit like ice. The woman he had once trusted had orchestrated the trap, and he, blinded by pride, had allowed doubt to destroy the only person who had stood by him without condition. For the first time in years, he felt shame. The next morning, he made his move. In front of the cameras, with reporters crowding outside his headquarters, he stepped up to the microphones. His voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. "The woman you call a fraud," he said, "is the only person in my life who has given me honesty without asking for anything in return. The lies you have been fed came from someone desperate to hold on to a past that no longer exists. I will not allow her name to be dragged through the mud any longer." The press erupted, but he did not waver. For the first time, he used his power not for profit, not for pride, but to protect her. She watched the broadcast from the small apartment she had returned to. Her hands shook as tears blurred her vision. After everything, the humiliation, the accusations, the heartbreak, he had chosen to stand for her, not against her. That evening, he arrived at her door. No limousine, no entourage, no mask of control. Just him, standing in the dim hallway with eyes stripped of arrogance. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice low. "I let my pride blind me. I doubted you when you were the only truth in my life. I do not care about the contract anymore. I care about you." Her heart pounded, torn between anger and the undeniable pull that had always drawn her to him. For a long moment, she said nothing, the silence heavy with all the pain that still lingered. But when she finally met his gaze, she saw not the cold CEO, not the man who had hired her like an actress, but someone who had finally laid down his armor. And for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe this was not just a performance. Maybe this was the beginning of something real. The confession at her doorway lingered in the air like a fragile thread. She stood frozen, the weight of his words pulling against the memory of every wound he had left on her heart. He had shattered her trust once. Could she let him close enough to do it again? He stepped closer, his voice low but unflinching. "When I hired you, I thought I was buying a shield. I thought I was controlling the story. But I was wrong. You are not a contract. You are not an illusion. You are the only thing real in my life." Her lips trembled, her eyes burning with tears she tried to hold back. "Do you know what it felt like? To stand beside you and feel the world mock me? To hear you, of all people, call me a weakness?" His gaze broke for a moment, the proud mask cracking. "It felt like I was protecting myself, but all I did was destroy you. And the truth is, you are the strongest person I have ever met. Stronger than me." The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, she whispered, "The contract is over." "Talibal." He nodded, stepping even closer until only inches remained between them. "Yes, it is over. From this moment forward, there is no deal, no performance, no mask, only me, only you." Her heart pounded. She wanted to resist, to remind herself of the pain. But his eyes, stripped of arrogance, filled with sincerity, pulled her in. For the first time, he was not the CEO commanding a room. He was a man, flawed and vulnerable, laying everything bare. "I hired you to crush my ex," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But you crushed the walls I built around my heart, and I do not want them back." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She had promised herself she would never fall for the act, never confuse performance with truth. Yet standing here, she knew this was not an act. This was real. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Then show me. Prove to me that it is not just words." .com. He reached for her hand, gently this time, no contract binding them, no rules dictating the gesture, just him, just her, choosing each other. In the quiet hallway of her modest apartment, with no cameras, no audience, no stage, their lips finally met. It was not the polished display of a fake couple, but the raw collision of two people who had fought through pride, pain, and fear to find each other. And in that kiss, every line between illusion and reality disappeared. The days that followed carried the weight of change. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy them unraveled piece by piece as the truth came to light. His ex-lover's schemes were exposed in full view of the public, her lies traced back to calculated jealousy. The very people who had whispered behind champagne glasses now turned their judgment on her instead. For him, the redemption was not in the headlines, but in the choice he had made. He had stood before the cameras not as a businessman protecting his empire, but as a man defending the woman who had become the center of his world. The board no longer questioned his judgment, his family no longer pressed for explanations. The tide had turned, but this time he did not celebrate with pride. He celebrated with gratitude, because she was still by his side. For her, the journey was different. She had stepped into his life as an outsider, mocked and underestimated. But now, when she walked into the penthouse lobby, the same staff who once stared at her with suspicion greeted her with respect. She had not changed her heart to fit his world. Instead, her kindness and quiet strength had changed the way his world saw her. Weeks later, when he asked her to marry him for real, there was no contract, no folder filled with clauses, no hidden agenda. There was only him, standing in front of her with a ring, his voice steady. "This time, it is not business. This time, it is forever." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Yes, not because of the ring, not because of the wealth, but because the man before her had finally learned what love truly meant." The wedding that followed was not about status or spectacle. It was intimate, filled with the people who mattered most. No reporters, no staged appearances, no audience waiting to tear them apart. Just vows spoken with sincerity, promises forged in struggle, and two hands clasped tightly as if letting go was no longer possible. As they walked out together, she glanced at him, the man who had once hired her to play a role. Now he was the man who had chosen her above the world. And he, looking at the woman who had once been invisible to everyone else, knew she was the one person who had seen him clearly from the start. The story that began as an illusion ended in truth. The performance that was meant to deceive became the love that defined them both. And so, the calf girl, who had once counted every dollar, walked into a future where she was no longer bound by survival, but by love. A love that had crushed pride, silenced lies, and proven that even in a world built on contracts, the heart writes its own terms.